Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to, hello, may I have your attention, please? Ladies and gentlemen, may I have your attention, please? Thank you. Sorry, we haven't done this in a while, and we've never done it this way. We're trying today to do a sort of a hybrid program. Part of it will be live here at the library. Part of it will be recorded, but everyone will see it, whether you're watching on Livestream or you're here. Hopefully, if all goes well, that's what will happen. But we'll do our best. Anything that goes wrong, just give us a few seconds, we'll fix it. So, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
If you're not receiving emails from us, but would like to, just fill out a form over there by the yellow box I made 15 years ago, and put your form in there with your email address, and I'll get you on our mailing list. Next week on August 3rd, Daniel Frizzy, who's from Bel Air, is an attorney and part of the historic Bel Air Stone Arch Bridge Society. I think that's what they're called. The program is called Stone Arch Bridges of the Ohio Valley, and will include ours, the one at Tunnel Green that was designed by Mr. Ellett, we think, for sure, pretty sure. So that will be next week, August 3rd at noon. The Ruther Pollock Labor History Symposium, if you're interested in labor history, is on September 4 this year. We have numerous good speakers, including Dana Kaldemeyer, Bob Hutton, and Hal Gorby, and Patrick Cassidy. They'll all be talking about various labor subjects. If you'd like to do that, you have to RSVP soon, because the seats will run out pretty quickly. Just let me know. Send me an email or call me, and I'll get you on the list. We have a $10 charge, but it's only for lunch. If you don't want to pay anything, if you want to get your own lunch, it's a free program. Don't forget about our Manus Cam. We have 2 Manuses upstairs that live now in the library. They're getting bigger every time they molt. And you can watch them on the library's website. Just go there and search for Manus Cam, and we have them on live 24/7. Of course, it gets dark. So there's a few hours you can't see them. But it's pretty cool. Our next People's University will be an in-person series on the Cold War. This is a massive topic, obviously, so I'm researching and working on the structure of it as we speak. Well, not as we speak. As you know what I mean. Okay. Now, without further eloquence, I will introduce to you the host of the Wheeling Poetry Series and the Poet Laureate of West Virginia, Mr. Mark Harsh.
Aaron, do I need to kneel? Do I need to kneel like Sean was kneeling? Okay. Welcome. It's good to be here. It's good to be live again. How long has it been? I can't remember. Anyway, it really is a treat to be here. I cannot thank the Ohio County Library enough for supporting the Wheeling Poetry Series for many years now, and especially thanks to Sean and Aaron who get us off the ground, as it were. I'll just say briefly, the next event will be, I think I've got the date right, November 16th. If it's a Tuesday, I've got the right date. Look forward, there'll be more details coming soon. This afternoon, it's a real treat. I got this kind of brainstorm, and it was an easy brainstorm when I noticed that not only did Carrie Connors have a brand new book out a year or 2 ago, but so did another young man I met by accident at the sesquicentennial celebrations here almost 10 years ago, Jake Stroutman. Also had a new book out, and also hailing from Marshall County originally. So I thought this is really something to have 2 younger American poets, each of them with new collections of poetry published by truly, let's say, respectable major American publishers. They both possess exciting voices, and I hope you look forward to this afternoon as much as I do. I'm going to save my introduction for Jake for later, because it's going to be an introduction that Sean and I recorded a week or so ago. So, on to Carrie. Carrie Connors is a poet and a scholar of poetry. She's originally from Marshall County, as I said. She lives in Queens in New York City and is a professor of English at LaGuardia Community College, part of the City University of New York system. Her first collection, Luscious Struggle, was published in 2019 and selected as the 2020 Patterson Poetry Prize finalist. Her poetry has been nominated for a Pushcart Prize and has appeared in numerous publications. She is the author of the forthcoming books Laugh Lines, Humor, Genre, and Political Critique in Late 20th Century American Poetry, published by the University Press of Mississippi, and forthcoming Species of Least Concern, her second poetry collection from Main Street Rag, a very fine press hailing from North Carolina. I thought I'd share with you the actual blurb that I wrote for Carrie's first collection, Luscious Struggle. I wrote there how rare it is to find a first book containing poetry of such delightful impetuousness and flawless storytelling. The poems are at turns funny and sad, profound and playful. I was not surprised to find one poem written after Russell Edson, and his hand is felt in several of these pieces also. There are other poems whose strength relies less on the delightfully weird and more on simple, close observation of the everyday, as seen through the dual lens of heartache and blue-collar struggle. I must admire as well her understated humor in a poem like Sex Ed and the strikingly macabre whimsy of a poem like Ambulance Driver. It's an astonishing first collection. It really is. Holding power and promise, and you'll be hearing from Carrie for many, many years to come, I'm quite sure. It's a deep pleasure to introduce her here this afternoon, Carrie Connors. Please make her welcome.
Thank you, Mark, so much for that beautiful introduction and for inviting me to read for the Wheeling Poetry Series. It's such an honor, and I just want to also thank you for all the support that you give to poets throughout West Virginia and to poetry in general in your role as a poet laureate. So I'm also, before I start reading, I want to also thank the Ohio Public Library for hosting this event and for all the events that you've been hosting virtually for the last year and a half of the Lunch with Book series. It's been really wonderful to follow along. So thank you so much to Sean and Aaron. And thanks to everybody for coming. This is my first in-person reading since the end of 2019. So I know it's pretty wild. That was in Brooklyn, New York, I think at the end of the year before the pandemic hit. So it's really a treat to be sharing poetry with people in person, but also thanks to people who are watching online virtually. I know I have a lot of friends in New York tuning in right now too, and from other places as well. So Mark mentioned in his very lovely blurb the poem Sex Ed, and that is set in part in Wheeling, and so I figured I'd start with that one today. Sex Ed. After my mom declared, "You're just showing off," when I asked at 12 years old if my bras had shrunk in the dryer, I started going lingerie shopping with my former babysitter. On break from college, she picked me up in the Banana, her decomposing Volkswagen Rabbit. One day, the turn signal wand snapped off in her hand at a stop sign by the old Fostoria factory. And she'd drive us to the Stone and Thomas in Wheeling with my mom's credit card in my pocket. As our thighs fused to the black vinyl seats in the summer heat, she'd tell me about college parties with stolen nitrous tanks. This guy's dad's a dentist, a history professor she dated. His stomach is flat, not washboard, just smooth, so sexy. Raking a hand through her blonde hair, more Malibu than Moundsville, West Virginia, and I pretend to understand. We'd stop at a dive bar to get vodka cranberries and styrofoam to-go cups with bendy straws. Bartenders never questioning my age, half a foot taller than my chauffeur, before greeting the hairspray sales ladies with their frayed tape measures. She dared me to try on red satin or black lace, and we'd laugh in the fitting room, mock the sales lady's judgmental stares at her cutoffs with the hole in the ass revealing a peek of her jockeys, and she pushed me to pick at least one that wasn't beige cotton. After, we visited her boyfriend, a mortician her parents didn't like. Sometimes at the funeral home while he was preparing a body for viewing, Metallica blaring from the radio. More often at his apartment, where they pop open beers, kiss, try not to openly resent the girl, preventing them from doing more, while I read the liner notes of his record collection. Always made more nervous by the charge between them than the corpses, by the way he'd pick her up and spin her around so fast for too long, because I had never loved anything so hard in my short life that I needed to grab it, try to make it fly. So in the collection in Luscious Struggle, there's a series of poems about a woman with the disorder called pica, where you sort of eat non-food items, and this is the first one of that series. It's called Geophagia, the series, which means to eat the earth. Geophagia 1. She was surprised at how easy it was to chew through a pencil, how the wood splintered neatly between her molars and the graphite dissolved on her tongue. She still doesn't know what was different about the day her body took control. She was doing the Sunday Times crossword at her desk, penciling in guesses and erasing until the lines dividing the boxes blurred. Sometimes she'd cheat and squeeze an extra letter in to complete the corner of the puzzle, craving the sense of satiety. Maybe it was the taste of the dregs at the bottom of her coffee that made her do it. The bitter, earthy flakes filled the spaces between her teeth like spackle. Maybe it was the scent of melting snow ripening the dirt in the yard, or the bird with a straw in its beak constructing a nest on the neighbor's awning. Whatever it was that pushed her from nervously nibbling her pencil, making patterned indentations in the painted wood with the tips of her incisors, to biting down with intense pressure like a bird crushing the shell of a nut in its beak, it left her shaking. Vertigo. He always blamed his clumsiness on it, caused a scene, inflated ankle from an uneven sidewalk, holes in the thin walls of the shared college house from his shoulder, hip, head. He fell down a lot, scraped knees and elbows like a 5-year-old. He only had it once in high school. One Tuesday he got lightheaded playing basketball in gym class, but that sometimes happened when he moved too quickly. Only when he fell off the stool in biology lab. Felt like the ground was moving then. Did he suspect something was off? Asked to go to the nurse. In college, he'd say, the effects can linger for years, you know. But he'd always been awkward. In 3rd grade music class, we had to perform a song. Those not musically inclined could lip sync. Dare indoctrinated, thinking the song was an anti-drug ballad, he bobbed his huge curly head off time to Clapton's Cocaine, whisper shouting the words, not seeing the conservative music teacher scowl through most of the 2 minutes and 48 seconds when she finally cracked, enough! Or his ouster from the popsicle factory, his first summer job, after 6 weeks of cardboard scraped fingers and puffy knuckles from a metronomic machine that shoved the wrapped treats into boxes he closed and stacked, never able to get the timing. Or how he padded barefoot down the middle of a Pittsburgh street on a summer night, high on words and friends and mingling, after scribbling what he thought were profound ideas in his notebook, only to read, disappointed and dizzy in the glare of morning, what to do, what to do, what to do, what to be, what to be, what to be. Cooking show host seeks a career change. After an hour of brainstorming her job skills, she compiled 1. Smiling through anything, even cramping facial muscles or fingers sizzling against the side of a cast iron pan. 2. Uttering fake orgasmic noises for the camera when she bites into food. It's always too hot to taste anything right after you take it off the burner. By the 4th show, she realized that by closing her eyes, she could stymie the tears from the singed tongue while amplifying the appearance of pleasure. From this list, she figures she might have a future as a phone sex operator or politician. She can't do it any longer. Last week, while demonstrating the proper technique of pan-searing foie gras, she swore she heard a duck's angry quacking. On her website, her favorite foods are listed as sea scallops, with cilantro gremolata and ginger lime beurre blanc and walnut almond cake with orange pomegranate compote. But most nights she eats Cocoa Puffs or Doritos. Giving up, she slices a lemon, twists her fingers into its flesh to cover the smell of garlic, a tip she told her viewers, but that never really eliminates the scent. Gift offering. It was snowing, as it always seemed to for funerals. Black wrap dress, black mid-height heels, my interview and funeral garb. I didn't check the weather before packing for the trip back home to send off Glory, Glory. My grandmother always sang the Battle Hymn of the Republic to her grandchildren, but could only remember the chorus. I'd been tapped to bring the gifts to altar during Mass. I didn't refuse, though I'd lapsed at adulthood. The church had received a large donation, installed shiny new hardwood floors so smooth you couldn't feel grooves between the slats. The center aisle carpet absent to show off the renovation. When it came time to retrieve the gifts, water and wine in Italian restaurant oil and vinegar bottles, the snow tracked in on others' boots had melted into pools on the wood floor. Of course I slipped. My right knee cracked the floor, loud as a gunshot, as I hugged the end of the pew to keep myself upright. I didn't flash anyone, but said shit as I went down, probably drowned out by the collective gasp of the mourners. Only after I was back in my seat, I rolled my eyes at the priest when I handed him the bottles. Did I cry? Not from the embarrassment, the line that would get me through the rest of the day in my head already. No one puts the fun in funeral. Or old Catholic guilt, but because my bruised, throbbing limbs ached like adolescence, of which she was such a part, her ruthlessness in euchre games, her rapid-fire prosecutor's questions about my life, her easy laugh. Teresa, the Polish priest's pronunciation of her given name, sounded exotic, regal, not the usual West Virginian Teresa. It would have tickled her, made her shoulders bounce up and down, the first indication of a giggle before any sound. My tears stopped as her song played us out of the church, though the bruises faded slowly, over a month, from navy to green to yellow, back to the dirty ivory that was hers. So I'm going to be back in Wheeling in a couple weeks for the Blues Fest, which my parents have gone to. My parents are back there. I've gone to every year since it started, and I've gone to a few times. Not every single time, but one of the times that I was lucky enough to go, I was inspired by a lot of things that I saw, and so this one is inspired by one of those visits. The title is "Overheard in the Bathroom at the West Virginia Blues Fest." These goddamn aluminum fish bowls remind me of prison. Her voice, a rock-filled gizzard, makes me think I've seen and heard enough for the day. The man who dances like a rooster, shoulders jerk, chin juts, long, dead arm swing. The other dancers give him a 3-foot clearance radius all day. The jeweler with dementia who used to sell bracelets he made from antique silverware and now can't remember his wife's name. Playing the spoons on stage with a band of young Alabama boys. So good they all just shake their heads. Or the green pallid guitar virtuoso who's had some young man's liver inside him for just 4 months, talking about the car accident that took that kid's life so soon and allowed him to stand there, picking at strings, moaning out old sorrows, so we could all feel a bit better by feeling bad together. And he's sorry that he doesn't have a song about it yet. But to be honest, he doesn't think he ever will, because some things are too rich to be translated into sound. So I'm going to read a few poems from the collection that's forthcoming. It'll be out this winter. I'm not sure if that's going to be 2021 or early 2022. It's called Species of Least Concern. And in that collection, there are some poems that are about work and workers, but also some kind of poems about animals, whether deep sea creatures or birds or other wildlife. So it's kind of a mixture. The first one is one of the poems that's focused on work. It's called Negotiations, Wheeling Pittsburgh Steel and United Steelworkers of America. 5 pile into Martinelli's boat of a Cadillac, crank the windows down, turn the radio up. They're set to drive up to Pittsburgh from McMecken for negotiations with management. The company declared Chapter 11 in April of '85 after the union refused to sign a lousy contract, took away grievance rights, so they all walked out. 60 days in and the press is talking, even the big papers, and Sully knows there might be a photo op. He's a sharp dresser, sporting a tight paisley polyester button-down, so bright your eyes water. It's the kind of early summer day that makes you notice your own breath, skin, really look at other people. Martinelli's lit up one of his cigarillos with a dashboard lighter, tapping ashes out the window. Son of a bitch, you lit me on fire. The sleeve of Sully's shirt going up faster than a dried out Christmas tree. Big Sam smacks out Sully's arm before he's burned or shirtless. Everyone howls. Later, in front of the photographer for one of the Pittsburgh papers, Sully hides his disintegrated sleeve behind Big Sam. They're all grinning into the camera from the beauty of the weather, Sully's faux anger, the thrill of fighting for each other, and this time they won the day. So this one is called Sinus Pressure, and it's one of the ones that's more inspired by sea creatures. Sinus pressure is a euphemism for being afraid to fall asleep, even if you could, which you can't, because you just know that one or both of your eyeballs could shoot out of your head at any second. It's not necessarily that you're frightened of this event. You've always been fascinated that your eyes are attached to you by a thin string of nerves like the ball on a paddle toy. You just want to be awake when it happens. For years, you've secretly loved those scenes in action movies when someone, usually in space or in a deep sea vessel, enters a pressured environment and his eyes start to bulge out like an angry cartoon villain, foiled again. You anticipate the Jack-in-the-Box finale, but it rarely transpires. These flicks suddenly become conservative, hung up on seeming not too over the top, despite CG leviathans or 3-breasted purple aliens traipsing around. Disappointing. The deep sea isn't concerned with believability. Fattening eels and demon-spawned fish neon the dark like glow sticks at a rave. All the pressure down there seems liberating. The polka-dotted squid aren't concerned about seeming gauche. They just put on their freak show to the tune of the giant tube worms, organ piping the music of the deep. So this is one that Mark requested that I read. Hunger Strike, Moundsville, West Virginia, 1987. My brother and I danced around our bedroom to the finger cymbals rhythm, singing Krishna Krishna, Hari Hari, as penitents in saffron robes marched the length of the West Virginia State Penitentiary across the street. Swami inmate Tirtha Das, born Thomas Drescher, convicted murderer, was on hunger strike claiming religious discrimination. A few years before, the Krishnas had built the Taj Mahal in the West Virginia hills, called it the Palace of Gold. Journalists couldn't resist almost heaven headlines. By the 4th day of the protests, we weren't dancing. The number of demonstrators increased each day. They even brought a baby elephant, Nalini, who performed tricks. People came from neighboring towns to see it, a free circus. Enterprising locals sold sandwiches and coffee. The nearby ice cream shop was down to White House cherry and French vanilla. We covered our ears, wondered if the chorus would ever get out of our heads. Finally, Governor Archmore convinced the warden to allow the Swami to prepare vegetarian meals in the cafeteria for himself and his converted inmate followers. After the crowd left, the silence had weight. Any sound that mimicked a drum beat or a cymbal crash stiffened our backs. We'd hum the chants to get under our parents' skin over the next few months. But the whole thing faded like a shadow swallowed by nightfall, especially when the pen shut down in '95, years after a judge declared its living conditions to be cruel and unusual punishment. The steel mills shuttered and coal mines closed, leaving the town deflated like the big top on a carnival's last day. Soaked up shop windows on Jefferson Avenue, a few blocks north of the pen. The Strand's theater marquee rusted and crumpled. The prison chaplain who clashed with the Swami left to preach in Ohio, taking his daughter and my friend with him. The whole town's population did, outnumbered by the ghost of prisoners skulking and peeling penitentiary halls. So now for something completely different. This one is a little lighter in tone, and I just have two more. And this one's called Birds. At dinner, I catch myself chair swaying to the bass line of Another One Bites the Dust. This is a song birds would dance to on the internet. I believe in my bones I know what they like, despite never owning a bird or even knowing their names. I know, bad poet. I posted a pic of a striking bird family on my fire escape. My writer friend commented, "OMG, you have American kestrels on your windowsill." I had almost labeled the post "Cool Pigeons." I don't know the names of trees either. But I've always had a special bond with birds. Years ago at Tenney Park in Madison, when it wasn't winter, I'd go listen to the ducks lampoon the world so often that they'd waddle up and sit with me, though I never fed them. One let me pet its emerald neck. Just last week, I took my writing class to Central Park to observe nature and went off on my own, the true reason for the trip. I had a bad day at department meeting. So you're saying that the Provost's subcommittee on best practices for classroom inclusivity is by invitation only? Correct. I listened to a rat wheeze under a tree crotch, then spied a robin standing on a concrete path with its matchstick legs. We locked eyes. It cocked its head to the side and shat. I sighed. Exactly. After dinner, I Googled birds dancing to music and saw a cockatoo headbanging its yellow mohawk while Freddie Mercury growled, strutting to the beat of the same exact song. Now in meetings, while colleagues debate the efficacy of rubrics used to evaluate student artifacts, I'll smile, daydream myself a modern St. Francis of Assisi who lives in the forest, or at least Central Park, with a plastic sack of Wonder Bread and a boombox. My comrades and I listen to my mix of curated songs, bob our heads, strut and preen like our queen on stage at Wembley Stadium. So this will be the last one. And I don't think I necessarily need an introduction to this. I will just say I have had a haircut since I wrote this one. It's called Pandemic Hair. Pandemic hair. It's a lot. Thick thatches, Rapunzel manes, sideburns, and man buns fill the Zoom screens, turning work meetings retro, complete with the Brady Bunch squares. Let's not mention colleagues' attempts at bang sculpting with kitchen shears. Mine's as long as it was in high school when I was a cone head in my swim cap. I long for bad haircuts of bygone days. Almost. It's curly, and tumbleweeds congregate in room corners, when actually rolled across the living room floor when a stiff breeze blew through the open window. The theme song from The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly played. Boot spurs sprouted from my slippers, a lasso holstered to my pajama pants. Or maybe that was the neighbor kid practicing her flute. It's hard to say with all this hair muffling my ears. The other day my ponytail scared me. Before the plague, it would stick out in a straight, short puff. But now it hangs down, and I gasped when it brushed the base of my neck. What did I think it was? Company? It spooked my husband too. Before a shower one day, he found a 2-foot hair dangling from his crotch. For a split second, thought it was his. A hair gone rogue. Like the time when my father had an eyebrow hair that measured a good 2 inches. He refused to pull it out, annoying my mother. I think he's proud of it. I've developed a stripe of gray right in the front, like a skunk or a witch. I try to tell myself it's cool, look at Bonnie Raitt, but I can't sing or play slide guitar. I just flap my hands, rant about enjambment to the black boxes of my Zoom classes while blinking my hair into my eyes and spilling coffee. Full-on caricature. I've thought about shaving it, envying my husband's bald dome while I burn through bottles of conditioner. I just know my head's lumpy. And hopefully it's only a few more months. The vaccines are coming. Old-timers say to get a haircut if you go through a rough patch. Shed the parts of yourself that have known sorrow. So maybe when it's safe to tell the barbers to take more than a little off the top, for the colorists to mix up their magic formulas and help us hide the passage of time, the first wisp of our heartbreak will be swept into the dustpan along with our dead ends. Thank you all very much.
here begins the great experiment. So I will just say thank you again to Carrie. Wasn't that a lovely reading? We've got to all go out and buy both her books, all three of her books. And it's a pleasure to welcome Jake and the recording thereof. And we hope there'll be time for you to ask questions afterwards. And the recording thereof. It's my pleasure to welcome everyone to the Wheeling Poetry Series. Today will be a mix of both the virtual and the in-person. Today we're doing the virtual part. I am going to be speaking with Jacob Strautmann. Jake, tuning in from Greater Boston. Can I put it that way, Jake?
That's a good way to say
it. When I began thinking of this program, at least a couple of years ago, I was so excited to realize that not one, but there were two young poets, both hailing from Marshall County, West Virginia. And not just young poets from Marshall County, but young poets that had significantly marvelous books, coming onto the national scene. It was a real thrill. I'll not do my whole background now with how I came to meet Jake, but I want to point that out from the beginning, that Jacob Strautmann and Carrie Connors are fine young American poets really making a splash in the larger scene. So, as I say, Jake was raised in Marshall County, West Virginia. His debut book of poems, The Land of the Dead is Open for Business, was published by Four-Way Books just this past year. Four-Way being one of the most exciting publishers of poetry in the U.S. right now. His poems have appeared in the Boston Globe, Agni, Salamander, Southern Humanities Review, Blackbird, Appalachian Heritage, now Review, and many others. He is also the past recipient of the Massachusetts Poetry Fellowship from the Massachusetts Cultural Council. He is currently the Department Manager of Economics at Boston University, where he also teaches playwriting. He lives in Belmont, Massachusetts, with his partner, Valerie Duff, also a fine poet, and their two children. As I say on the blurb, and I was honored to be able to write a blurb for this book, the poems in this fascinating debut collection are woven together with a surprising syntax that grabbed hold of me and wouldn't let me go. Their magic drove me onto ways of perceiving that were transformative and to places filled with sights never seen and yet which felt oddly familiar. Frequently, I found Stroutmann redefining my terms of engagement with the world. When I said, quote, when I said parent, I meant topography. They prove in the end to be unsettling poems, but in all the right ways. There are narrative poems here as well, but they'll not lead you to answers, only to the curious beauty of wonder. Of poetry, I could ask for no more. It's a real pleasure. Please welcome Jacob Strautmann. Jake, it's all yours.
Thank you so much, Mark. Wonderful introduction. And thank you to the Wheeling Poetry Series, the Ohio County Library, and of course, to Mark for having me. I'm really excited to virtually share this moment with Carrie Connors. I had no idea we were both hailing from the same county until Mark put us in touch with each other, and what a joy it's been to start to get to know Carrie's work. I'm going to read from my book, a lot of poems from my book that is really set in the northern panhandle, West Virginia, in a lot of ways. There are a couple poems that aren't, but I have been waiting since March 2020 to be able to read these poems in my home state. As Mark mentioned, it's called The Land of the Dead is Open for Business. It's published by Four-Way, and it means a lot to be able to share it with all of you today. To begin, in honor of my fellow reader and our shared memories of Moundsville, I'd like to start with a poem that isn't in the book, but maybe should be. This is called Moundsville Trains. My mother loses her confidence on Rankin's turn up the steep grade. Traffic blocked, her clutch foot burns and stalls the Mustang. She had driven us to the library, past cold Fostoria stacks, the card catalog of family businesses dying down Jefferson. I must be 6 and unbuckled, my sister bundled in her car seat. Horns chorus, and the smoke lifts blue and stinging as tears. A man knocks on the window, and she leaves us to him, watches from the median, a bright blouse on a drear hillside. He gives no name, drives us to the top. With the grunt of the parking brake, he meets my eye in the rear view. Deal with it. And I chew boldly on my book. Some bravery caught in glass and metalwork, the stink of the river, Adena burial mound, shadows, churches, Mitchell plant sky. The drivers of Moundsville stream by more determined than ever, long black trains coughing from every open window, every word they mouth. So both that poem and the next one I'm going to read are 14-liners, very nearly but not quite sonnets. And that form kept showing up in this book. So I want to start with What's Left from the beginning of the book. And it has an epigraph by Pasternak. It seems your mother is not your mother. You are not you. Home is an alien land. This is What's Left. Every earring, every hole-punched penny, and feathers blowing from the open coop baked in a half mask of light sharp as seeds. Here was another language, a red circle, rusted square wrote fallow, a zipper of bones made bird, her little faces inside out. Like white corn husks blistering our farm, the ridge cap healed under. Another run, a turn. There was nothing to forgive. Precambrian death magnificently still, but for the moon, that living pockmark, stitching it all back, pulling bare the threaded night. The curtain shook, the wind rising. When I said parent, I meant topography. The book's title comes from the longest poem within it. Two things I want you to catch in this poem, and they both sound like figurative turns. I'll use the word portal, and of course I'm speaking about the ventilation systems. The mines run 24 hours a day, and of course they fill the ridges and valleys near where I grew up, near Cameron. And I also use the word palace. As some of you know, I grew up next to the Krishna commune in Marshall County, and I'm referencing their palace of gold I see on the horizon every time I visit home. But yeah, they're figurative as well. This is the land of the dead is open for business. Take 22 from Pittsburgh International West through Weirton, cross the Ohio, ride 7 all the way down. To your left, barges, coal black with it. Follinsby coke plant ignites the night that never leaves that other shore. A note in the margin of 1001 love poems, sincerity, intention pillowed in my younger hand, and sequins. Her Sadie Hawkins taffeta caught on a latch, stuffed in a cedar box for 20 years. Or the folded swatch of childhood, scented linoleum past, knit from the sewing room floor where she draped her shoulders over the threshold, and the part of her body with me a stranger. She cranes her neck to guard the black shape of her parents' closed door. Now, she says, nothing's eternal in the land of the dead. And after dinner, stars, vaulting heavens collated in the ridge black trees and portals whirring fans break my easy phrases. All my beauty should be less for being here. sad lake hanging from the quicksilver air, quivering. I am writing in the dark an explanation. Why this place doesn't black itself out, become a necklace of pylons spanning Richmond to Cincinnati. Autobiography of cross-throughs, cuttings, pretense. Is this the way you see it? The further you drift, the way a man driving miles of border between a palace and his home along a silver road admits who is beloved, who is not. Pulls to the median, radio off, and awaits the heat of his shock to rise from the wheel and for his wrists to unstiffen and lift like a sound in his throat he cannot clear. Here are a couple short poems about a kind of what I'll call a male despair of a particular West Virginia kind, I think. This is a very short poem called Death of a Young Girl in the Town of Cameron, West Virginia. Years later, a tree falls from the hillside of her cemetery across Route 250's hairpin turn, crushing a moving car, the man inside. Goshorn Ridge Proposals. A flick of her tongue was wind crossing fence and swishing mares. On contour maps of Cameron District, Marshall County, West Virginia, men ripple in isolation. What's unlikely to be written well, their muscular turning away is sentiment caricatured, dry leaves drilled by rain until they break. And I guess I have some despair from the other side of the aisle here. This is, she longed to be a bird, whitetail, stray dog, sliding out crooked in the birth night of summer. Screen door thrum, aluminum siding in the porch light. She pulls apart the barbed wire fence. Torn tail and mane brush her throat. She crouches into the darkest pasture and duet passages downhill for the pond below that a farmer backhoed decades before. And further down, a run over spills with newborn crawdads and the blacker than black shale on shale. Her porch light blazes and whimpers. A solitary trunk as cold as a branch shoved in mud shares the pond side. She was her husband slipping for years to different corners of the yard. She was her children the ridge lines crossed through. Their absence pulls in the diesel track. Gentle fingers gesture to the run and the blacker than black and the thrill. This is Two Doves Gone When He Was Gone, Windmills of Grief. There is no heaven, but tall grasses shimmer the wind, milk heavy with seed. The field lifts a wing. She wrings a cloth in cold dishwater, brushes with the back of her wrist an eyelash, and lets the caravan arrive, joyless as an apostle. Her porch rings with the King of Love, my shepherd is, with what they've read of comforting, the iron stylus and the rock. Fruit basket cellophane, Tupperware steaming with the balm of pierogies. She hugs each man and woman thank you and sees them off. A tiny thing flits yellow and black, renewing farewell. The clothesline jumps. Behind tired clouds, the crows imagine human lives. And then to round this out, I'm going to read a couple poems from a voice or a perspective I was surprised continued to show up in this group of poems, more from a child's or a teenager's perspective or voice. This is South Garden. Forgive our cultivated ugliness, I won't. And even if we'd seen it through a third growing, believe me, I'd be a mean, toothless liar like Papaw. Flat rock slick with garter snakes, squash we never planted, groundhogs our dogs dragged to the till line, corn, flowers, a cold, unmoving eye. Virginity could mean nothing there with possum, milk snake abloom in the ragweed, and all the dead soul words I knew the square fence rusted around. We kept his tiller for years wrapped in a yellow tarp. The shock of death was his flag fraying under the pine. Daddy Longlegs shuttled, some towards, some circling the meat of my finger. By then, we'd ripped it out, a place for my bike, for living things. He meant well. He meant nothing at all. My mother lay beside him, unbuckling the degenerative vertebrae. We kept death, and he kept us. She kept those years in a mason jar. So I taught creative writing for many years at Boston University, intro to creative writing. And so these were first-time poets, many of them, and short story writers. And so, of course, I gave them the important lesson that we don't, manipulate our audiences by, I don't know, putting a puppy into a story and then having it die just for sympathy. And I told them that every year for like 20 years. And then I wrote a poem about dead puppies. So let me read that one to you. Killing Frost. Frost, diamond scratched the panes, the tarp's exterior dew frozen stiff. Our Sadie licked a leathery pile in the morning glitter, half-born pups. All dead, I wouldn't believe. I yelled for Dad to help. He knew, without bending a knee, removing a glove, the batch was cold and weren't ours. She must have found them in the woods. They looked like hers. She guarded them even as he gently snagged with the wide-mouthed coal shovel the blue hairless thoughts I shared with her. We reached the field's limit. He laid the shovel like a nurse might, a blanket on the fulcrum of his shoulder. The field waited, and Sadie waited, and I held her collar to keep her. As he flung them through the buds, damaged, frostbit, ice-tipped, she must have found them in the woods, I thought too late that morning, when the world grew thousandfold. She must have found them in the woods. In the very late 70s, Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers put out a song you all know. Some parts of West Virginia where I grew up had never left the late 70s. At least they hadn't by the 90s. This is Don't Do Me Like That. The dirt road plummets off Sutton Hill where Viola's bone cattle hoof the creekside of 1979. Grandmothers curdled in shacks chant Hare Hare Krishna. They were young once too. We're taking bets. Sheriffs at the black flag since Tuesday, and you'll never clear the stink of mouse out of a Trans Am's vent. Doesn't mean we can't dare you to pop the clutch, crank your window, bellow whatever the hell crass thing you need. July dust thickens on the leaves. Everyone is waiting for what will never come. So go on. We need a good rip. Flip us the bird, John boy. Gun it. Spit gravel. Get. I think that's as upbeat as the book gets. And I do think the 70s might creep into this one as well. Monongahela, Allegheny Coalfield. The season turned them out on their heads. The kids flicked butts at the tipple and tracks. With Waylon on the radio, shirt sleeves cut free, and blew through quick as pickups, slipping the valves of some mountain trumpet, rising chord on chord like pines, like blasted fill, high lonesome sound of high school football fields, and higher still shrinking in the belly of the air. Over a city or great lake unknown to these horizons, strung 3 times tree to tree. Near the wasp-spangled tool shed, paper bloat of an August harvest, someone regretted each and every year he held on to them like a stone turning in his belly. He held the answer, heard the burden once lifted in the wind. They be gone for good. No chance they stay. I'd like to finish with 2 poems. First, I have to read a wheeling poem, and then I'll move on to the final poem that finishes off the book. This is Wheeling Baptism. Down on an island tear-shaped as Christ's sandal fording the river, the flood stage crests would wash the sinners under were it not for the buckle of I-70 clasping Bridgeport. Front streets empty storefronts, white, shin deep in the cataclysm of their place, sway to furtive preachers, lurch at whatever wisps below, tins of negatives, paddlefish ribs, the long dark train maneuvering spring thaw through cores of cinder blocks. Squares of light clogged with sediment, they roll away in mourning like a sun. I grew up hearing my dad on the radio Saturday nights on WWVA as part of Bluegrass Breakdown. And whenever they would broadcast the Jamboree live, one of my friends, a banjo player, was fighting for his first marriage when I wrote this next poem. I'd like to dedicate it to my late friend, Michael Iafrate. It's called 5-String. Coal sings somewhere inside us fathers. A black furnace blesses our kids, buries mountain-like vows, and the rest banjoing between midwives your new discord. Claw the bridge or burn what your girl tomorrow will hear. Thread that thought. You have no choice. Peg it, tighten so it twitches with the heat of choice. You'll touch that stirring until blisters. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Jake. That was absolutely terrific. Everything I would have wanted. Only I would have wanted more. It's those of you that are tuning in. Do I use that word with zooming? Whatever the hell this is. Let me say there are many other terrific poems to be found in Jake's new collection here. Just loved hearing those poems. And my Lord, that Wheeling Baptism summons up the ghosts of James Wright in all the right ways. I really enjoyed that.
That's really touching. James Wright, of course, along with Irene McKinney, are in my pantheon that I keep returning back to, of course.
Well, me too. I'm always telling folks, you can't write from here or in your instance come from here without the ghost of James Wright overshadowing much of what you would do in poetry. So home is an alien land, the Pasternak epigraph. How much do you think that being away from here has influenced your work? I mean, this particular collection is clearly very much fed by the place from which you were raised. Do you expect that to continue, or
maybe this actually segues to my stock question. That is, what are you working on now? Where do you see your work heading? But you might want to prefigure that with some reflection on that.
It's a good constellation of questions there. I certainly, when I left West Virginia to study poetry in Boston, I had at that point, other than maybe one other person, not really learned anything about our literary history. And so I thought I was in a vacuum. And certainly, folks that I was around didn't, point me in any particular direction. And so I thought all of my literary heroes would come from outside. And so I took off for the Northeast. And when I was starting to show my poems to others in my master's program, nothing was landing until I wrote about home, until I wrote about the Northern Panhandle. And in fact, that Monongahela Allegheny Coalfield comes from that fall semester of what I would call trying to find my voice. What it was really about was finding my subject. And I kind of kept at that, kind of following that star as far as it could take me. And it took me about 17 years to finally pull everything together into a manuscript and really kind of crank down on it to get it to where I wanted it to be. In the course of that, I will say I got so tired of writing about West Virginia.
That's natural. That's natural.
How I phrased it, but how much does this place affect your work? You anticipate going on to do so, or just in general?
Yeah, we'd have to.
How I phrased it, but how much does this place to my area of your work? And just what you're working on in the present, perhaps, a reflection.
We good? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Cool. Yeah, I'll always write about West Virginia. So I mean, I moved to Pittsburgh for college when I was 18, and then Madison, Wisconsin for graduate school when I was 22, and then New York City for my job when I finished my doctoral work when I was 30, about 11 years ago. But I will always write about West Virginia, and I think it's just because I'm influenced so much by the place, but by my family and by the people here. And I always, of course, come home to visit. And so in my work, people's voices are very important, and I include a lot of overheard speech, and I'm always so inspired by the voices of people here, from here. And so I think I will always write about West Virginia. And what you were asking Jake too about being away, if that affects a perspective, I think so. I think it makes you miss your home, right? And so, and when you have that sense of longing, memories sort of flood back and become bigger and brighter in your mind, I think. And then if you have remained, and so I think that is something that comes up for me quite a bit. So as far as like what I'm working on now, I'd say continuing to write a lot about work, also about sort of the natural environment. I use a lot of humor in my work, so I am constantly reading poets who also kind of do the same. We were just talking about Gerald Stern beforehand. When I was in college, a Pittsburgh poet, Jan Beatty, I was lucky enough to have her as a teacher, and she definitely encouraged me to write about Moundsville and my home. And she had volunteered at a creative writing program at the West Virginia State Pen. So she knows Moundsville well. And so she was someone who very much encouraged me to write about where I'm from. So to always see that as special, and to you know, realize that your background and the things that you experienced are always going to be there for you. And she writes so beautifully about Pittsburgh and has been doing so for years, but always finds a fresh perspective on it. And so that's what she encouraged me to do. I hope that answered your question. Yeah. I don't know if I rambled a little bit.
No, we did have a question come in online, so Sean was going to.
If you take a look at the big screen, I'll put it up. I'll show it.
There's a little bit of a delay,
Okay.
so we take about 5 seconds for it to come up. Unfortunately, we haven't figured out the system.
Oh, awesome! Yes, 100%. Yeah. So the Blues Fest poem that I read earlier is in the book that's already published. So I will happily make that trade. That sounds like a great trade to me. So and to read it at the Blues Fest, oh my God, that would be such an honor. So absolutely. But that's yeah, I'd totally make that trade. That's awesome. I'm so flattered by that. I can't really even express it. That's so fun.
Yeah, we would continue the video, Mark.
You folks are better aware of how much we want to play with timing. So that's probably one. So this way?
Yes.
Okay. Thanks again for coming. It's we've never done this before, and you're brave. Carrie's brave. Jake's brave. I think Aaron and Sean are brave. I'm just foolish, but thank you for coming out. Again, I can't thank Carrie enough for being here with us today. She has a few copies of her books for sale. You can see her afterwards, and of course, my online thanks again to Jake for giving such a good reading in the virtual format. So thank you all. Don't miss the upcoming programs for Lunch with Books. It's such a stunning series we have here. The labor history stuff, see Sean about that. It's some exciting programs coming up there as well. And November 16th for the next Wheeling Poetry Series. Thank you again. Have a good day.